Ezekiel is a strange and remarkable work, entirely in the first-person voice of the prophet, which makes the work unique among the prophetic literature. What do you make of this work?
I remember very clearly being in grad school and one of my professors psychologizing Ezekiel, and
so easy with the first-person voice,
and essentially just saying, this guy was nuts, and which you understand as a response, right? It's the book opens with this incredibly famous wild vision of the deity, which we'll talk about, and then it's just chapter upon chapter of again super complex visions and oracles, and he just seems so angry, right? And he's
afflicted.
He lurches between just saying terrible things about Israel, and then saying but.
But unlike Jeremiah, there is a restoration.
Sure. I mean, and that's super important. And part of that has to do with the setting, right? And so it helps to understand that. Right? Ezekiel, whereas Jeremiah is before and on the cusp of exile. Ezekiel's in it, right? Ezekiel is living in Babylonia. Right? He has been exiled, right, in the first wave, right, the 597 wave of exiles of the elites before the 587, 86 full thing. So
he's in the elite.
For sure. I mean, he's a priest. There's no one is more of a priest in the Bible. Ezekiel out-priests Aaron, right? He's the priestiest of the priests. Ezekiel is out there as an elite, as a priest in Babylonia. And, so the difference between him and Jeremiah is is preaching doom, and Ezekiel's living in the doom, right? He is post-doom. He's mid-doom.
Post-apocalyptic.
Right.
Which is a funny thing to say because, his work, more than any other prophetic work, will, his visions will inspire apocalyptic literature.
Sure. But he's out there, he's living in the exile. He's not in Israel. And the community he's speaking to is that community, right? It's the community in exile. And Ezekiel maybe is the first of our, probably chronologically, the first prophet to have to sort of theologically reckon with, okay, what now?
Yeah.
The worst thing has happened, and
and where do we go from here?
Right, and actually worse than the worst thing, right? In pre-exilic texts, what they all think the worst thing that's going to happen is exile, and the actual worst thing that happens is the temple is destroyed.
Yeah.
And it's
the loss of divine presence.
Exactly, and Ezekiel is 100% about that, right? Right. That's one of the main messages.
Yeah, and it's especially illustrated by the priestly knowledge and language that he clings to throughout the work.
Yeah, I mean, Ezekiel, as I said, is Ezekiel is clearly well versed in the priestly literature of the Pentateuch, right? The priestly source. And in fact, specifically the layer of it that we call H, right? So
the holiness code.
The second layer of P, Ezekiel picks up on enormously, which is sensible because that's the part of Leviticus in particular that essentially says, if you guys keep on screwing up, not only will God leave the temple, but you're going to get kicked out of the land.
Yeah.
So here they are in exile.
So it's worse than the curses in Deuteronomy 28.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, this is a way worse outcome.
Right, and so Ezekiel is out there in 597 and following, trying to figure out how do I make sense of this, and what can you prophesy, right? And so, I mean, you said, right, it's not just the doom of Jeremiah, but it's also the restoration. And this is what we see sort of across the prophetic literature, right? Pre-exilic, the threat is exile. Once the exile happens, you can't threaten the exile anymore.
Yeah.
Right? So all you have left to you, and we see this in 2nd Isaiah, and we see it in Ezekiel, is this notion of okay, so the stick didn't work. let's try carrot, right? Like, what if, like, the way to get Israel to change its ways, which is what every prophetic text wants, is not to say it's going to get bad, but to say here's our path to it getting better potentially.
But before they get there, right? There has to be a kind of physical, embodied experience of Israel's sinfulness, and Ezekiel. I mean, this is why it's so interesting to talk about the idea of the prophetic word event, because in Ezekiel, the idea of the prophetic word event and textuality all gets kind of like mixed up in a very strange way, even already at the very beginning, right? So it begins with this incredible vision, right, of these. Well, I'll just read it here. So as I looked, so this is in the first person voice of the prophet, right? As I looked, a stormy wind came out of the north, and this stormy wind it's especially like evocative of like a divine wind, right? Of a great cloud with brightness around it and fire flashing forth continually, and in the middle of the fire something like gleaming amber. In the middle of it was something like 4 living creatures. Now these are not the kind of cherubs that you like paint on, that Michelangelo would have painted of like babies. No, these are fearsome creatures. This was their appearance. They were of human form. Each had 4 faces, each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, the soles of their feet were like the soles of a calf's foot. They sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings on their 4 sides they had human hands, and the 4 of their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another, each one of them moved straight ahead without turning as they moved. As for the appearance of their faces, the 4 had the face of a human being, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wing of another, while 2 covered their bodies. Each moved straight ahead wherever the spirit would go. They went without turning as they went. It's like really interesting. I have to just stop myself here because from what we know about Ezekiel's cultural backdrop in Babylon, he would be encountering the image of such fearsome creatures in state-sponsored architecture, right? These fearsome hybrid animal creatures, except in the case of state architecture, they would not be moving, right?
Right. And I mean, you haven't quite gotten into, but what comes next in the description is like, okay, so these crazy 4-fold faces, et cetera,
very
wings,
inspired
hands.
By his exilic context.
And they've got wheels, right? They've got wheels under them. They're moving around. And again, we talked already about how one of Ezekiel's main sort of theological issues is when the temple is destroyed, where does God go? And not only where, but how? Right? Like
It has to be mobile.
God is mobile, right? In a way
Which also brings you back to the language of the building of the tabernacle.
Sure.
Right? And so that will be very, very important. But even the priestly language in the description of creation and the description of the building of the tabernacle, all of those descriptions is echoed in this language of the very detailed description of each and everything.
Sure. And also and it's funny because it's incredibly detailed and precise. And also at the beginning, as you were reading, right, this repeated refrain of like, it was something like this. It was a thing like, it was like this. It was
because
something like this.
Because it's a vision.
It was it had the form, it had this was their appearance. They were of human form. Like all these words that both sort of say, I'm going to describe a thing, but it's real hard to describe the thing.
It's a little bit like what he will describe in chapter 8 when he's transported to Jerusalem in a vision. That it's got this hazy, imprecise quality to it, which is, I think, meant to remind the reader that these are visions. And you're inhabiting the very hazy world of the prophetic word event and first-person subjectivity. And that might seem like a kind of like modern jump to this, but I think that there's something to be said about the fact that, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Jeremiah are all framed in this third person, discourse, whereas Ezekiel is the first person speech experience of this prophet who is viscerally experiencing the divine word in a way that is not pleasant at all.
I mean, when you say viscerally experiencing the divine word, like literally consuming.
Yes.
Not to jump ahead, but
that's,
happy to. But physically consuming the divine word, and it is unpleasant, right? Like, we hear the like, oh yes, the divine word, like sweet like honey on my lips, right? It's not quite, I think, how Ezekiel experiences it.
Right. And so this idea that this is chapter 3. He said to me, "O mortal, eat what is offered to you." And you're thinking like, this is like in Alice in Wonderland, like eat me. Eat this scroll, right? So really embody my words in the most literal fashion possible, and go and speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat. He said to me, "Mortal, eat this scroll that I give you, and fill your stomach with it." And there's a little bit of a language there of like the stomach and also the womb, and there's this idea of like the literalizing of the prophetic opening for divine speech. And then I ate it, and in my mouth it was as sweet as honey. It's very strange. The experience is sweet, but the words are bitter.
Right.
Right? He said to me, "Mortal, go to the house of Israel and speak my very words to them." Here's ipsissima verba here.
Right.
"For you are not sent to a people of obscure speech and difficult language, but to the house of Israel, not to the many peoples of obscure speech and difficult language, whose words you cannot understand. Surely, if I sent you to them, they would listen to you." Right? They'd listen to you, right? But not these people who speak your language and still just can't get it through their thick skulls, right? "But the house of Israel will not listen to you, for they are not willing to listen to me. Because all of the house of Israel have a hard forehead and a stubborn heart." And this kind of language also of the anatomical composition of Israel will be echoed later in a language of the hope of restoration, right? Like, what is it that will make restoration possible for Israel? Well, clearly a heart transplant, right? They're going to have to change that stone heart they have for something of flesh, something that is more malleable and dynamic and alive, as opposed to something desiccated and dead. And we'll get to the dry bones.
Indeed we will.